I saw you in Boston last October and talked to you about animals and the difference between aging and declining, and you clarified a lot of things that seemed very obvious once you said them. But I have more questions around that. I have had a long desire throughout my life to work with animals, and I am now in the throes of doing that, and I'm feeling really, really good about it.
You're working with animals because they need your help, or you work with animals because it gives you something satisfying to do to spend your time?
I would say the first part mostly. One of my questions, now that you've brought that up, is I get very emotional about how I feel about animals. And even in situations where the outcome is good, I will find myself very emotional about it, which I'm having a hard time understanding whether that is a disconnected place or if that's just coming from a place of feeling really passionate about them.
That feeling of sadness comes from having a desire that in this moment you're not a vibrational match to. In other words, there are so many things about animals and your relationship to them that could be connecting in nature, just as there are so many things that from your perspective might not be connective in nature. In other words, it is our suspicion, it is our absolute knowing, that if you were to follow a lion around for a while, you would have some uncomfortable experiences. Even though the lion is doing what lions do and is in perfect vibrational alignment with its own source. And even all of the furry little friends that it consumes in the time that you are following it are also in vibrational alignment. And so what we are getting at here is that when you, in a sort of factual, truthful effort, examine the lives of anyone other than yourself, from your vantage point, you get out of kilter. In other words, this will feel off the subject, but it's not. Imagine a family who has this relationship with their children, and they have this thing that's been going on for a little while, and this very comfortable family is in the process of bringing their child into an understanding of the agreements of their household. And the child is mostly connected to Source and is mostly feeling good, and sometimes loses his connection and doesn't feel so good. And this family is lovingly assisting him. And now they're out in public, and you hear a very brief, maybe 30-second dialogue between a father and a son, and it upsets you because you don't know the rest of the story. In other words, you draw all kinds of conclusions based upon your own relationship with your father, and so you come to this conclusion that is so upsetting to you, where if you knew the whole story, you wouldn't be upset at all. You would have seen it as the perfect piece in the unfolding of this relationship, and you would understand it, and you would be at one with it. And the same sort of thing happens when you step into, from your perspective, anything that's happening with anyone, whether it's an animal or other people. You just can't overlay your set of desires and your set of beliefs and come to the right conclusions as you watch others. And it is really, really a hard thing for physical humans to understand the nature of animals. In other words, we hear so many well-meaning people, and it may feel we're off the track with you a little bit. We'll come back with the specifics of what you're wanting to talk about. We want to get this said. So often, physical friends will want humans to behave differently with animals. And we say human interaction with animals is far less than animal interaction with animals. And the animal interaction with animals, in terms of behavior, is much more barbaric than the human interaction with animals. But the reason you don't discuss that is because you don't seek to gain much control over the animal kingdom, while many of you have decided that you are going to get control over the human kingdom in one way or another. So, having said that, let's get to the specifics of your concerns.
Well, my desire is to work with animals in a healing way. I'm in school right now getting my certification as an animal massage therapist to treat animals that are post-surgical and working animals who may have physical discomforts, for lack of a better word. When I see animals that are hurt, there was a bird that got hit by a car that I saw, and I picked him up and he had a broken wing. I just bawled like a baby. I don't know how to overcome that emotion. I feel that sadness.
Well, that's what we meant when we said you're overlaying how you feel about that. In other words, it's like Esther letting the fly out of the motorhome because she knows it only has another hour or two to live. In other words,
I do that. I
you don't
save
want to
all the
spend
bugs
it.
in my
You don't want to
house.
spend it in here when
Right.
there's that big world out there. you see.
Exactly.
But what we are getting at is the fly or the bird. They are not approaching their life in the way that you are. The first thing that we're wanting you to realize is that you cannot overlay your perspective. The beast is much more comfortable with making its transition. And so the bird that is hit by the car, there's something going on, first of all, that the bird is hit by the car to begin with, and it is not struggling against releasing. And the bird does not suffer because it does not struggle against its releasing, you see. A bird hit the window on Jerry and Esther's house. They have big glass doors. And Esther heard it happen. And, of course, they love the birds. And they feel responsible when that happens because they've put these big glass windows that they keep perfectly clean. And so the bird hits it every now and again. And the bird was lying still. And Esther saw the bird, and she did not want it to upset Jerry, so she decided that she was going to remove the bird before Jerry saw it. And so she scooped the little bird up in her hands, and as she is walking, she decided to sit on the porch for a little while. And she said, "Abraham, what do you think about this little bird? Is he really dead?" He was still. Esther could not feel any motion within him. And she held the bird for a little while. It began to squirm and wiggle, and then she opened her hands, and it stuck its little head out and looked at her like, "What are you doing to me? Let me go, and let me go now." And Esther was enjoying it so much she hated to let it go. It was full of life. And then she could feel its little feet scratching, and in other words, it was saying, "I want to go, I want to go, I want to go, I want to go." So she opened her hands and off it went. And then she said, "I have healed the bird. Bring others to me." And we said to her, the bird was at that place of making the decision whether to reemerge into the non-physical or to remain in the physical. And the bird, oh, hear this, it is so important to hear. The bird will make the choice that feels best. And because the bird or the beast or whatever it is does not fear death, then sometime, and if the body is broken, in other words, a bird with a broken wing does not want to remain.
Right.
In other words, it does not want to, and will joyously reemerge into non-physical, understanding that it can flow right back into the next egg of the next bird and be right back in a body that's not broken very shortly, you see.
Well, basically what I did is I took this bird to one of the ranch hands that were there, and I asked them to put it out of its misery because I knew that if I knew it was going to make its transition one way or another, and I just wanted it to be
But the thing that we are saying to you is
easier.
you are assuming its misery. You are assuming misery that it does not have. You are the one that should have been put out of your misery.
You're right, because I was bawling like a baby. I was miserable over
He
it.
should have just hit you over the head with something.
So should I have just let it be? Should I have
We
just
would.
left it on the side of the road and just let it be?
We would. We would assume that it is the creator of its own experience. We would assume that it is guided from source energy. We would assume that if its body was recoverable and according to its belief about its existence, about wanting to fly, that it would have made its recovery or it would have made its transition, and in either case it would have been the perfect response. It would have been the perfect choice. And it does not require human, disconnected intervention. Jerry said just yesterday, as they've been moving from park to park to park to park to park, he noticed that there are just the right number of blackbirds and just the right number of squirrels and just the right number of chipmunks and just the right number of bears, just the right number of creatures all over the place. In no place that they were did they have too many of anything. In other words, it's as if they know what they're doing. Maybe they do. It is all orchestrated from a broader level. And so if you will let your prayers for them be from your place of appreciation rather than from your place of concern, then you can have this interfacing with them. They can be a true enhancement to your experience. But they do not want your worry. They do not want your concern.
You know, I'm not surprised that you would say something like that. My sister and I refer to this as the duh factor, because when we hear you say these things, we go, well, duh, you know, it just makes so much sense.
But you see, this
it's
is
kind of funny because I'm just now in the throes of having kittens that were dumped in my parking lot 7 days ago, and one of them I rescued, and the other ones I'm feeding, and I'm trying to figure out what to do with them. So for you to actually bring that up is very relevant, and I appreciate that feedback, because it's been a struggle for me to figure out whether to just let these little beings be or to assist them.
Well, it's an interesting thing
how we domesticate animals. I feel responsible.
It's an interesting thing how all of this dovetails to what we're talking about here, because the reason you feel the way you do is because you've practiced feeling that way. And as you do some virtual realities where you are reminding yourself of the well-being of all things, in other words, we are not saying to you that kittens don't die and that birds don't die. We are also saying to you that death is not a bad thing. In other words, it's that human fear of death. It's that human fear of suffering. And the thing that we so much want to emphasize in a way that you will hear it, we've said it already, you heard it, but we'll emphasize it again, is that when you suffer on their behalf, you're the sufferer.
Right.
And the word suffer, in other words, when you see animals that are suffering, the thing that you have to understand is that you are interpreting their suffering through your suffering. And so most of the suffering is happening on your behalf. And if you were not a part of it, their experience would be different. Sometimes a domesticated animal will get confused about whether to stay or go because of the way you're calling them forth, or because of the vibration that you activate within them. In other words, they would make an easy transition if you weren't focused upon them and holding them in a vibration that was unnatural to their well-being and to their release. We think the thing about suffering and about death that is necessary for anybody to understand before they will ever be at one with the idea of it and ever feel ease in the idea of it is that the death experience is a joyful experience, and death is joyful. There is a very famous woman who has written many books upon the idea of death, and as she talked to Abraham recently, she said, "Abraham, why can't I die? Why can't I die?" And we say, you can't die in the same way that you can't get money or you can't get anything else that you want. You can't do anything that you're not in vibrational alignment with, you see. In other words, you have worried so much about death and pushed so hard against death as human race for such a very long time that it's hard for you to just relax into the well-being that is death, or relax into the well-being that is life. In other words, it's the same thing. You relax into the well-being. You relax into your wellness. And the thing that's tricky for humans is that they will see someone suffering, matters not who it is. And if they were to hear us or anyone suggest, just relax and release the suffering. Release the tension, release the resistance, which means relax into the well-being, and sometimes you will relax right into death. That just freaks people out. They think that at all costs, death should be averted. In other words, dying is the very worst thing that could happen. Suffering is much better than dying. And lingering is much better than dying. In other words, let's take that little bird who can't fly, who lives to fly, who feeds himself from flying, and let's put him in a cage and put a bandage on his wing, and let's keep him alive as long as we possibly can, because after all, we would not want him to reemerge into the joy of source energy. Not when he can stay and suffer in a bird body.
Well, and that makes sense now that you say it, of course. And for me, it's not about the death. I actually feel relieved.
We have an advantage you don't have.
That they make their transition. It's that time before that.
Well, we think that you are overlaying your suffering. We have an advantage that you do not have. We're dead and we like it.
I can tell that you like it. Okay. So moving on.